What if the habits that make someone look slightly odd, slightly distant, or slightly difficult to read are actually the clearest signs of an extraordinarily intelligent mind? Because here's what most people don't realize. High IQ doesn't just show up on a test. It shows up in the way a person moves through the world, in the small, quiet patterns of how they think, how they rest, how they connect, and how they process everything around them. And once you know what to look for, these patterns become impossible to miss. And here's what makes this particularly fascinating. Most of these habits don't look like intelligence from the outside. They look like quirks. They look like social awkwardness. They look like someone who thinks too much, sleeps too little, and talks to themselves when nobody is watching. But underneath every single one of these patterns, there is a very specific psychological reason. And that's exactly what we're going to explore today. Habit 1. They talk to themselves. Almost every high IQ person does this, and almost nobody around them understands it. They talk to themselves not because something is wrong, but because their brain is running so many simultaneous thoughts that speaking out loud helps organize them. Research in cognitive psychology shows that self-directed speech, what psychologists call private speech, actually improves problem solving and focus. When the mind is processing multiple layers of a problem at once, externalizing that process through speech creates a kind of mental order. For a high IQ mind, talking to yourself isn't a sign of confusion. It's a sign that something complex is being worked through. Habit 2. They do nothing on purpose. This one looks like laziness, but is actually the opposite. High IQ people tend to sit, stare out the window, and seem completely unproductive for long stretches of time. But inside, their brain is in a state of intense background processing. Neuroscientists call this the default mode network, a system that activates when the brain appears idle, but is actually making deep connections, solving unresolved problems, and generating unexpected insights. Many of the most significant breakthroughs in creative and intellectual history happened not during intense work, but during these quiet, seemingly empty moments. The pause isn't emptiness. It's where the real thinking actually happens. Habit 3. They avoid small talk. Extremely high IQ individuals are deeply uncomfortable with surface-level conversation, not because they're arrogant or antisocial, but because their brain is wired to seek depth and meaning in every interaction. When a conversation stays on the surface, it feels cognitively unstimulating, almost like running a powerful engine at the lowest possible gear. Research on gifted adults consistently shows they form fewer but significantly deeper relationships because shallow connection simply doesn't register as worthwhile to their nervous system. They're not being cold, they're waiting for a conversation that actually goes somewhere. Habit 4. They question everything. High IQ people question rules, systems, social norms, and assumptions that everyone else has already accepted and moved on from. Not to be difficult, but because their prefrontal cortex is constantly running a background check on incoming information. Asking a very simple question, does this actually make sense? This habit of intellectual skepticism is one of the core markers of high cognitive ability. And while it makes them exceptional thinkers, in everyday life, it often just looks like someone who won't stop asking why, who challenges things that don't need to be challenged, and who refuses to accept something simply because everyone else does. Habit 5. They have an unusual relationship with sleep. Many high IQ people stay up late, not by choice, but because their mind simply refuses to slow down, even when their body is exhausted. Others sleep at completely irregular hours, catching rest in patterns that make no sense to the people around them. This isn't poor discipline or bad habits. Studies have shown that higher intelligence is consistently associated with greater night owl tendencies. The brain of a high IQ individual remains in an active, exploratory state long after most people have mentally switched off for the night. Their mind doesn't follow a conventional schedule. It follows its own internal rhythm, and that rhythm rarely matches the rest of the world. Habit 6. They learn things they'll never use. High IQ individuals tend to be intensely curious about things that have absolutely no practical value in their daily lives. They'll spend an entire evening researching the architectural history of a city they'll never visit, or learning the mechanics of a skill they'll never professionally use. Psychologists describe this as need for cognition, an intrinsic, almost biological drive to think, explore, and understand, simply for the sake of understanding. There is no end goal. There is no application. The learning itself is the reward. And this habit, more than almost any other, reveals something fundamental about how a high IQ mind is wired. Curiosity isn't a strategy, it's a need. Habit 7. They notice hypocrisy immediately. High IQ people are acutely sensitive to inconsistency in the people around them. When someone says one thing and consistently does another, their pattern recognition registers it almost immediately and files it away. They don't always say something, they often don't, but they notice. And once they've noticed a pattern of inconsistency in someone, it becomes very difficult for them to unsee it. This makes them exceptional judges of character over time, but it also means they can become quietly and permanently disillusioned with people, often without the other person ever understanding why the dynamic shifted. Habit 8. They are deeply self-critical. High IQ people hold themselves to a standard of thinking that most people would find genuinely exhausting, not in a self-destructive way, but in a relentless, ongoing pursuit of accuracy and precision. Cognitive psychologists link this to a process called metacognition, the ability to observe, evaluate, and critique your own thought processes from the inside. The smarter the mind, the more vividly aware it is of its own potential for error, bias, and incomplete reasoning. They are their own harshest editor, constantly reviewing, revising, and questioning whether what they think they know is actually as solid as it seems. Habit 9. They need to understand the why. Tell a high IQ person what to do, and the first thing their brain does is ask why. This isn't resistance. This isn't defiance. It's simply how their cognitive architecture processes information. Without understanding the logic and reasoning behind a system, instruction, or expectation, they cannot fully commit to it. The reasoning isn't a bonus, it's the foundation. And without that foundation, the instruction feels incomplete, arbitrary, and impossible to fully internalize. This is why high IQ individuals often struggle in rigid, rule-based environments. Not because they can't follow rules, but because they need to understand the rules before they can truly follow them. Habit 10. They are genuinely comfortable alone. Perhaps the most quietly significant habit of all. High IQ people are comfortable with solitude in a way that genuinely puzzles most people around them. Not because they don't value human connection, but because their inner world is rich, complex, and engaging enough to occupy them completely on its own. They don't experience silence as emptiness. They experience it as space. Space to think, to process, to work through ideas that the noise of the world doesn't allow. Solitude isn't something they endure. It's something they actively seek, protect, and return to, because without it, they cannot fully be themselves. When you look at all 10 of these patterns together, something becomes very clear. None of them are about performance. None of them are about showing intelligence to the world. They are all deeply internal, quiet, private patterns of how a particular kind of mind experiences and processes reality. And perhaps that's the most important psychological insight here. High intelligence isn't just a number on a test or a score on an assessment. It's a fundamentally different way of moving through the world, one that comes with its own rhythms, its own needs, and its own quiet intensity. A way of being that the world doesn't always recognize, but that leaves its mark on everything it touches.